Today, we are gonna make a capelet. I am so obsessed with capelets. I think they are so cute and they're the perfect winter fall accessory. They're kind of an accessory, right? Because you can mix and match and coordinate them to your outfits. Capelets are such a 1940s, 1950s fashion staple. If you take a look back in the archives, you are gonna see little capelets galore. Sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're longer, sometimes they're asymmetrical, sometimes they have pockets, sometimes they have collars, sometimes they have buttons, sometimes they have ruffles. There are so many options to creating a super cute little capelet. Aren't those vintage sketches just so cute? So I designed this super cute, simple little capelet pattern for you to sew along with me. It's in sizes extra small through 6X, and you can get it at sewanastasia.com under those digital downloads. This pattern has a full lining in it, so today we are gonna sew up a little capelet with a full lining. And at the end of this video, I'm gonna give you some hacks for changing up the style of this capelet. Kind of consider this capelet pattern the foundation of all capelets. Let's go check out the pattern and cut out our fabric. So here's our capelet pattern, and this one is a large format copy. You can also choose to download the one that you print out on your home printer and tape it together. So once you know what size you're going to use, go ahead and cut it out of paper with your paper scissors, and then we'll lay out our fabric. And bam, here it is. I've got it all cut out. So now we're gonna lay out our fabric. First, I'm gonna lay out my self fabric, which is the outside fabric. So I have my wool fabric laid out here and I have it doubled up since the front capelet pattern is cut too. Also, make sure you double check your grain line so everything hangs nice. Ooh, new blade is nice. Now we have our front capelet cut out. Now we're going to cut out our lining out of this beautiful satin flannel. Again, center back is on fold and the front is cut too. Okay, now we have our lining all cut out. Once you have all your pieces cut out, it should look something like this. We have our back self, our back lining, and we have 2 pieces for the front self and 2 pieces for the back lining. Now we're going to place our self pieces right sides together. And we're going to sew from the neck all the way down to the hem of the cape. And we're gonna do that on both sides. And your seam allowance for this step is a 1/2 inch. You're also going to do the same thing for the lining. We're gonna place our fabric right sides together and line up that shoulder seam. And we're going to sew from the neck down to the hem of the cape. And this seam allowance is also a 1/2 inch. So from here, all the way down to here. Now let's head over to the iron and iron open our seams so they are nice and crisp. I'm going to be using the ham to iron my curves today. I'm going to turn it on its side and I'm going to place my seam right on top of that curve. So my curved shoulder seam is going to go right on that ham. So when I put the seam on the ham, I'm going to press it open with my fingers just a little bit, and then I'm going to grab my iron and steam it and get it to be nice and crisp. We're putting it on the ham because it's going to follow the curve of the shoulder. If we just placed it on the ironing board and tried ironing it, we'd get some creases and pleats in it, and that wouldn't look so good. So just work your way all the way down the seam until the curve stops, and then you can iron the rest of it on your ironing board. Look at how nice that curve is looking. And now the flat, straight piece of the cape here, we can just lay that flat on the ironing board and iron that nice and flat. Look at that. Our seam is nice and pressed open. And now you're gonna do the same thing to the other 3 seams. Now that you have all of your shoulder seams sewn up, your capelet should look something like this for the lining and the self. And now what we need to do is lay them right sides together. So lay yourself right side up, and you can really see where those shoulders are gonna be right here. Just fold those down. And now you're gonna take your lining and place it on the right side of yourself. And now what we need to do is pin together the neck. First, we're gonna sew together the neck, and that seam allowance is going to be 1/4 inch. Now the most important part here is making sure you line up your shoulder seams. So we need these shoulder seams to line up so nothing pulls funny and everything lays nice and flat. Also make sure that your seam allowance is pressed open. So I would make sure you pin it open so that way when you get there with your sewing machine, it's nice and easy to sew. Remember, it's important to put the pin head perpendicular to the seam you're creating. If you don't put the head perpendicular to the seam you're creating, you know what's going to happen? Your needle on your sewing machine might run into the pin, it might make a hole in your fabric, or it might damage your sewing machine needle. And it's also way easier to pull out while you're sewing. Now that we have the neck all pinned up, let's sew it together. Don't forget, your seam allowance here is 1/4 of an inch. I always like to double check my seams when I get to them to make sure they're flat and open. If your seam wants to buckle up on you, make sure your needle's in, lift up your foot, and just flatten it out. And just rotate your project so that way the bulk of it is on your table. When you get to the end, backstitch and cut. And now your neck should be nice and sewn together. Now that we have the neck sewn up, it should look something like that. Before we go any further, we want to clip into this neck seam so that way it releases some of the tension of the curve. So I'm just gonna clip into it, making sure I'm stopping right before the stitch that's there. You'll notice when I pull the seam nice and straight, those little slits open up, releasing the tension of the seam. Now that we have our neck seam sewn and clipped, we need to create an understitch on the lining. So we're going to take the lining and we're going to fold it over the seam allowance. It's really important that your seam allowance is going to be facing the side of the lining. And now what we're going to do is create a little edge stitch on the side of the lining, so 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. And this is called an understitch because it helps keep the lining under. And we're gonna do that around the entire neckline. Now we're gonna add that little understitch all the way around the neckline. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and just carefully work your way all the way around. When doing such a small, precise stitch like this, it's a good idea to watch your alignment point and not the needle. That needle's not gonna move, but your fabric is. Backstitch at the end and cut. Now that we have the neckline finished, it's time to take our cape and place it right sides together. And we are gonna sew all the way around the outside of the cape. So it's real important to line up these edges and pin it together and make sure you're lining up your shoulder seams at the bottom of the hem. Those are the 2 alignment points I want you to find first. So we have a shoulder seam here and we have a shoulder seam over here at the hem. It's important to line those up so your lining doesn't get twisted. When you're folding the right sides together, we need to make sure that at the neck, it's folding at the original seam and not the understitch, because naturally it wants to just fold at that last stitch we put in. So we gotta make sure we're forcing it to fold at that original stitch. And when you do that, you're gonna notice that the seam allowance folds over the lining. So if you don't have your seam allowance of your self fabric folding over the lining, you probably don't have it folded right. So go back and double check. Everything should just line up really nice for you. And because the bottom of the cape is a curve, make sure you're not stretching it out as you're pinning it. Your fabric will stretch if it's a curve because certain points of the curve are on a bias, which is a 45-degree angle. And when your fabric hits those bias points, it loves to stretch out. Okay. When you get to the center back of your cape, I want you to chalk out a nice 3-inch opening. We want to leave this opening here so that way we can turn our cape right side out later on. So just keep working your way all the way around the cape until you're done pinning it up. And there we go. We are ready to go sew the whole entire perimeter of this cape. So now we're gonna sew the self to the lining all the way around the cape. And make sure you're sewing at 1/4 of an inch. Make sure you backstitch in the beginning and just guide your way all the way around the curves. When you get to where you're leaving your opening, I want you to come to that spot, leave your needle in, lift up your foot and turn to come off of your fabric. Backstitch and cut. So now we're gonna leave that gap open. When we start again, we're just gonna come to the other side of our opening mark that we left. We're gonna sew onto the fabric. So backstitch and come in 1/4 of an inch. Needle in, foot up, and turn, and now continue working your way all the way around the capelet. When you get to the top, backstitch and cut. Now the outside of the capelet is sewn up, and we need to go ahead and clip this curve here at center front. So you don't have to clip the whole capelet, but let's just clip this really severe curve here that we have at center front. And let's do that on both sides. There we go, all clipped up. Now what we need to do is tack the shoulder seams together. So we've got one on this side and then one on the other side. So the way we're gonna do that is take the front panel of the capelet and we're gonna tuck it to the inside of the back panel until you can see both of your shoulder seams. So now I can see both of my shoulder seams, and we want to take them and face them right sides together. But before we sew anything, we want to make sure they're lined up. So either work from the top down or the bottom up and just line these up and make sure they're in the same spot. So choose a spot anywhere in the shoulder really, and go ahead and pin these seam allowances together just on one side. And when we sew, we're going to be sewing in the center of the seam allowance. So we don't want to come into the seam allowance. We are just tacking these 2 layers together for a few inches. So that way when we wear it, the lining doesn't move and fall completely away from the self fabric. Our shoulders are tacked together and it's time to turn it right side out and take a look. So go ahead and find your opening that you left and just push it right through that opening. Oh, look at this, it is looking so good. Now it's time to iron the seam all the way around the cape and we're gonna give it a top stitch. What we need to do is top stitch all the way around the outside. So down center front and around the bottom. Since we already did the neck with the understitch, we don't need to do a top stitch on the neck. You could if you want, but there's no reason to. So we have our nice understitch here, and now we're gonna add our top stitch all the way around. And when we add that top stitch, we are going to catch this little opening in there, and that is gonna close up that little opening. Now it's time to add our buttonhole and our button. So I have this beautiful vintage glass button here that we are going to add to the top of our cape. And we're gonna add the buttonhole to the right-hand side. So traditionally, women's buttonholes go on the right and men's go on the left. So I'm just gonna mark the top and the bottom of the button here so I know exactly where to place my buttonhole. And so we are just going to set up a manual buttonhole and I'm going to add it right here on the front of my cape. I have my buttonhole selected on my machine. I have my manual buttonhole foot on, and we are going to create a buttonhole. So don't forget, they go backwards first. You make a bar tack at one end, come back down. One more bar tack to make. And now it's complete. To open our buttonhole, I'm going to put a pin right below the bar tack going horizontally. And now I'm going to take my seam ripper. We're going to start at the bottom. We're going to go through all of the layers and we're going to push straight until we get to the pin. And then I know exactly where to stop and I'm not going to accidentally ruin my project and just push it all the way through. So I have the front of my cape overlapped about 1.25 inches. and I know right where I'm going to want my button for the other side because I overlapped it. So I'm gonna take my chalk and just draw a little mark in the center of my buttonhole. And then when I remove that, I've got a spot right here. So I know exactly where to sew my beautiful button. So to sew this button, it's got a little shank on the back. So we're going to make sure that our thread is knotted on the back of this button. So we're gonna take our needle and we're gonna stick it through those 2 threads right below my knot that I made. If you guys need help threading a needle and making a knot, make sure you check out my video on that. Okay, so now we know right where it needs to go. So we're gonna stick our needle there. And now we're just gonna work our way from front to back, making sure we're going through that shank there so we can make the button nice and strong. Okay, once you've gone back and forth about 5 or 6 times, let's make a little knot on the back, and hopefully you kept your thread there nice and neat on the back side of your project. Before you fully pull, take your needle and go through the loop there, pull it, and then do that a few more times just to secure your thread. This is making a nice knot for you. Cut off your extra thread above the knot, and there you go. We are fully finished with this cape. So let's do up our button, and there you go. Okay, let's try on this cape. There we go. So cute. My shoulders are gonna be so warm all winter long. I really love the idea of creating a cape. They're so fun and easy to make, and you can make them out of so many different fun fabrics and combinations with your lining too. And don't forget, you can add pockets, you can add collars, you can add ruffles, you can make it fuller. You can do so many different things to just one little capelet pattern. Speaking of switching up this pattern, let's go over a few really easy ways you can make this pattern all your own. The first thing I'm going to show you how to do is lengthen the cape pattern. So let's say you just want it 2 inches longer all the way around. Go ahead, take your 2-inch ruler and just mark it out all the way around the hem, following the curve of this hem. And you could make it 6 inches longer, you could make it 10 inches longer, you could make this cape as long as you want. Just remember to extend the center back seam and extend your shoulder seam following the existing line that's there. And just like that, your cape could be longer. And make sure you do the same thing to your front pattern as well, otherwise your shoulder seam's not going to line up. But let's say you want to do like a high-low. Let's say you want it longer in the back than you do the front. So you really have some drama. So we can make this longer in the back, and then what we can do is blend it from the shoulder seam all the way down to center back. And then you're gonna get this cool drama in the back. You wanna make sure when you come to center back here that you don't have a point there, otherwise it's literally going to be pointed. So I would make a nice 90-degree angle here for a few inches, and then work your way up to your shoulder seam. So basically, you can change the style of this hem any way you want. You could even make it cool and scallop and just add some really cool scallop shapes. Your options are endless. But let's say you want this cape to be fuller. Maybe you're kind of going for some Victorian vibes. What we're gonna do is slash and spread it. Now I'm gonna show you how to add volume to the cape. Let's say you want it super fluffy. So what we're gonna do is draw some slash lines in this cape going towards the neck. So we are just going to draw out from the neck. So I did it there about 4 times. And now what we're going to do is cut from the hem all the way up to the neck. But I want you to leave the very edge of the paper connected at the neck. There we go. Let's turn our paper over so it's nice and clean. And now what we want to do is secure down center back. So I'm going to tape down center back. And now what we're going to do is pivot out from the neck here with these pieces. So the more you open it up, the more volume you're going to have in the back of your cape. Now you don't have to leave an equal amount of space in between each slash line. That's totally up to you in the style you want, but when you get it laid out to how you think you want it, then you're going to tape it down. And then what we're going to do is connect these pieces. We're going to kind of play connect the dots. And we want to blend them into each other. So like this one here, it ends up shorter than this one here. So we want to blend from point to point. So I'm going to go from the long point on this side to the short point on that side. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go from this long point to that short point. Now what we're going to do is trace out the shoulder. We're going to trace out our new neckline. Your neckline shape has changed, and that is totally fine. Let's draw the bottom of the existing cape pieces. And now I want you to remove that original cape pattern. And when we do that, we have a cape pattern that is bigger. But now what we want to do is go back and get rid of all of these points here that happened. So we don't have any here, but we have a few here. So you're going to grab your French curve or a curved ruler, and you want to make sure that these are nice and smooth. We want to blend these into each other. Straighten out your center back. Always make sure you label your patterns. Center back, unfold. And there you go. Now you've got a new cape pattern with extra volume, just like that. Now you have some creative options to changing up your capelet. I cannot wait to see what you do with this capelet and the pattern. Make sure you tag me at Anastasia so that way I can share them with everyone else. If you enjoyed the capelet video today, make sure you give it a thumbs up, give it some applause, and add a comment down below. Let me know what you think of the capelet. Are you going to make a capelet? How are you going to style the capelet? What kind of fabric are you going to make the capelet in? I want to know. And if you're not already a subscriber to Anastasia, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when the new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching today. These videos are for you. And if you have any special requests, leave those down below in the comments as well. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all the social media, so that way we can stay connected and creative together. And don't forget, you can get this pattern at sewanastasia.com under the digital downloads. And if you're in Chicago, come on in and take a sewing class with me. I would love it. And check those out at sewanastasia.com. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.